What's up, Michael? Thanks for coming on. I appreciate you reaching out. Why don't you just start with telling everybody what you do for a living?
So my name is Michael Ranka, Rainka. I'm a criminal defense attorney in Jacksonville, Florida. Been practicing criminal defense for the last 12 years or so. Um, so I have obviously a good bit of experience in that field. Part-time kind of watch enthusiast, so I'm in all those Facebook groups and I kind of follow along on Instagram. So familiar with Anthony, and I have a very rudimentary understanding of the watch business in itself. So there were two kind of worlds that one I knew quite a bit about, and one I knew enough to get myself into trouble, which is kind of what interested me in the first place.
Yeah. So, did you just see the articles that were coming out? How did you know about the charges?
No, so I had been following Anthony, kind of like everyone in the that's interested in watches, probably for like the last year. Just kind of casually on TikTok and stuff. I never really, I wasn't, if he had a video, I'd kind of glance at it for a few seconds and then kind of move on. But I actually saw the video, I think when Bob posted it, really early on. I remember when he posted that, it had only been up on TikTok, I think, for a couple hours when I first saw it. So, I've been following along since then, before it actually kind of blew up after that.
Did you know when you saw Bob's video? Or did you know like this is going to be a big problem?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. When you have the issue, when you have phone recordings is different, is, how can you actually authenticate, who this person is on the other line? But as more and more information came out, it became pretty clear that it was Anthony, and that he was in some trouble.
So let's just start with the affidavit. I think we've all seen that. My understanding is that's just to support the criminal charge, to get the warrant for Anthony to get a search warrant. Is that what a affidavit is for?
So the complaint was a criminal complaint. It's kind of a combination of the two. It was a criminal complaint and then an affidavit for a search warrant for, I guess, that like storage unit. In all federal cases, you have to be charged by an indictment. So a grand jury has to convene, and then grand jury has to issue a charge against an individual. So in this case, they're issuing a warrant for his arrest, based on the particular facts of the case, as well as asking for a search warrant to search the storage. I think it was just the storage unit that was listed in the complaint. But they want computers, they want documents, they want anything that could foreseeably have evidence of the crime on there.
Gotcha. So, to write up that affidavit, would they put all the details they have in there, or do they just kind of put enough to support, what they're trying to get out of that?
Yeah. So the standard or the threshold for an arrest warrant or a search warrant is probable cause, and probable cause is not a very high standard. So in most cases, they're not going to include everything that they have in that affidavit, because they just want to meet the threshold of probable cause. Probable cause is down here, where proof beyond a reasonable doubt's up here. So they're going to include just enough information that they need to make sure that the search warrant is granted, so they can get the information, more information that they want to maybe help prove that information that they held back, or just information that they didn't know about in general. So they're not going to include everything in an affidavit for a search warrant.
Gotcha. Then we see in there that he's arrested down there at that storage unit. What happens then? Like, where would do they immediately take him to the Metropolitan Detention Center? What's kind of the process from there?
Yeah, so he would be booked into a facility. Federal system is a little different as far as holding inmates. Typically, there are no federal county jails where if you're arrested on a state crime, you would be held in a county jail. Most federal agencies are FBI. They have contracts with the county court, county jails to house inmates there. So wherever he's being housed, I would most likely assume is in LA somewhere is a county courthouse. But he would be booked in. His photographs would be taken, and be sent to whatever particular unit he may go to. The booking process is not too intense, but because he was arrested on a warrant, there's not. He may have gone to what's called first appearance, where he goes to court the following day. After anyone who's arrested on a crime has to appear before a judge within 24 hours. And the purpose of that hearing is just to determine whether or not, number one, there's probable cause for an arrest, and number two, to set a bond. Because there was already an issue warrant, they've already met that threshold of probable cause. And typically there's a bond already set on the warrant. So he probably wouldn't even have gone to that first appearance because there's nothing that they would have accomplished at that hearing. He would have had his next court date passed to a later date to what's called either arraignment, where he would answer to the formal charges that have been filed against him, which I think is just the one count of wire fraud.
And so this is a no bail case. I guess he had that hearing or whatever. Maybe he went, maybe he didn't. But my understanding is there's no bail. What does that tell us? I guess. I mean, I know there's talk about a passport in the affidavit that he recently got. Is that probably why there's no bail, or does it have to do with he's gotten a couple DUIs where he's tried to run? Actually, one fairly recently. Does that have anything to do with that?
The DUIs, I for me personally, I don't think that makes much of a difference. When you're looking at wire fraud in excess of $3 million, a couple DUIs isn't really gonna move the needle much as far as the judge is concerned. But just as a constitutional principle, anyone who's accused of a crime has the right to a bond. So I would suspect that a bond would be set eventually. His attorney would certainly ask for a bond to be set so that he could bond out if he's able to. I don't know if he would be able to, because I would think the bond would be pretty significant in this case. But he does have a right to bond, and I think that would probably be one of the first things that his attorney would ask for a bond to be set.
And just on the bond issue, so there's two ways. You either pay the whole thing, and then I guess you get that back once the case is over, or you hire a bondsman, and that's like what, 10%, and then that's not really refundable, right?
Right. So a bond, the purpose of the bond is just to ensure a defendant's appearance at future court dates. So if you have a very high profile case that has a lot of alleged victims, and the amount in question is high, the bond is going to be high to reflect that. To say, I don't know what the bond would be, but just say $1 million. You post $1 million. If you run, that $1 million is gone. You forfeit it, and you're not getting it back. If you have $1 million in cash to put up yourself. If you don't have the full bond, you can go to a bondsman, and a bondsman's fee is usually 10% of that total bond, which you would pay to the bondsman. Let's say it's $1 million. The fee to the bondsman would be $100,000, and that's that's the fee that the bondsman would charge to service the bond, to put the collateral up, and to allow you to bond out. That money would not be refundable at the end of the day. If you do post a cash bond and the charges are resolved, that money would be returned to you minus any court costs or fees that may have been incurred. Typically in these types of cases, I would assume he would go through a bondsman because I would expect it to be number one, the bond to be high, and number two, what a lot of people don't realize is, in order to post a bond, in certain cases, the prosecution, you can't post a bond with funds that have been obtained illegally. So in a lot of drug cases, money laundering cases, Ponzi scheme cases like this, people will try to post a bond, and the prosecution will say, well, you have to prove that money is legitimate, that you didn't get that money from illegitimate sources. That's what we would call a nebia hearing, where they would have to prove, present bank statements showing where that money came from. Maybe it came from family members, maybe it came from friends. And then that kind of opens up the other Pandora's box, where he's already, submitting his bank records to show, well, this money came from X, Y, and Z. He's voluntarily giving up this information, which I don't really see happening. So I think he's going to be sitting in jail for a while, if I had to guess.
Now, there was this kind of wild theory that was floating around. A lot of watch dealers were talking about this, and they were saying that from the start, this was a civil case. There's no criminality here. And the people I talked to all these law enforcement agencies involved. I mean, they told me from the start, there's no truth to that. This is 100% a criminal case. Is that the way you see it too?
Yeah, no, it's 100%. It's criminal for sure. I've seen the videos on YouTube. I've seen the bigger dealers say, this is a civil case because you voluntarily gave the watches to Anthony to sell. Wire fraud is at the federal level. Here in Florida, it's what's called schemes to defraud. And basically what it means is you induce someone to provide their money or property to you under false pretenses of fraud. So, yes, you're voluntarily giving them the property, but, they in return are saying, I'm going to sell it for you and give you back, the proceeds minus my commission. So it's 100%. That's a textbook example of what we call here in Florida a scheme to defraud, or in federal level, the federal equivalent of wire fraud. It's 100% illegal. It's punishable by up to 20 years in prison on each count in federal law, and here in Florida, depending on the amount, can be up to 30 years.
Yeah, that's the way I saw it too. I'm going to get into some questions the guys over at Reddit had. That kind of the number one question I had was people asking about the other people at Timepiece Gentlemen, Liz and Darby, and these other characters. What should they be worried at this point with their involvement, or is this just the feds going after Anthony? Should his old business partner Marco be worried? There's a lot of shady tax practices these people have had over the years.
Yeah. If I was working, for that company, I would be extremely concerned about my position. I would, I think anybody would be concerned about, when your boss is arrested on federal charges. Everybody kind of, it's every man for himself at that point. So I wouldn't be surprised, if other people were charged, or if, people are cooperating to, avoid prosecution or something like that in the future. Because what happens a lot of the times in these federal cases, someone will get arrested. Typically, in federal cases, they are investigated a lot longer. They build their case, they have informants, they have all the evidence that they need, and then they, indict someone and they arrest them. They have informants that are going to testify. In this case was a little different because it was sped up from the beginning. Everything kind of blew up on online. People went to the FBI, and then the FBI started to investigate it, which I think was only about 3 months or so ago. So, that's a pretty quick investigation for the FBI. So what I would suspect, and typically what happens, is they'll have these what they call unindicted co-conspirators act as informants to say, look, we have you on XYZ charge. If you want to avoid any jail time or try to get the best deal possible, you need to cooperate with us moving forward against Anthony. And then, maybe we won't pursue charges against you, or it'll be for a less serious charge, something like that. So, yeah, I would be extremely worried if I was anywhere in the vicinity of Anthony, especially if I worked with him. And I wouldn't be surprised if people were already cooperating against him.
Yeah, I think they mentioned in the affidavit somebody has provided some spreadsheets, has cooperated. I think a lot of people from the outside, they see these people that are seemingly paid more than I guess they should be to work for him, and I guess, is it a defense to say just, oh, I didn't really know what was going on? I mean, people are obviously calling the shop, trying to get their property back, and I mean, they're telling them, no, we don't have the property. So, I mean, all these people involved, I mean, are they really going to be able to say, oh, it was just Anthony, we didn't really know what was going on? Is that a plausible defense?
It's not the best defense, no, to say I didn't know what was happening. If you're working in the business day to day and you're having watches come in and you're sending them out, someone's got to be in charge of the accounting and making sure who gets paid. I would have to assume that the people that are working at the business, Anthony sells a $100,000 watch, and he goes out and he buys a brand new car and nobody gets paid. That would certainly raise red flags in my head.
Sure.
So it's not the best defense just to say, hey, I didn't know what was going on, which is why I think, people that were working for him are going to have a lot more serious questions to ask, because, FBI they're going to contact everybody. They're going to interview everybody to develop their case further. Just because he was arrested doesn't mean their investigation is going to stop. They're going to continue to investigate, and they're going to continue to try to build that case against him.
Yeah, in addition to these people that worked for him, there are other dealers he worked with in terms of, Anthony's taking in these watches, and he's not necessarily selling them to guys like you and I that are retail customer. He's wholesaling them very quickly to these other dealers. And a lot of people have been asking about the possibility of kind of RICO charges, as there's a lot of money laundering in these operations at times. Is that a possibility, or is that I know people have said that this particular prosecutor is involved in a lot of these RICO cases. I don't know if that means anything, or
it could be. I mean, typically there are divisions in any prosecutor, district attorney's office that handle financial crimes, violent crime, sexual crime. So they're all there's different departments that handle them. So, I would, assume that the U.S. Attorney's Office out there is, they have their financial crimes unit, which would be working on this. But that's not to say that there couldn't be other charges coming down the line. Just because they arrest somebody on one charge doesn't mean they can't add charges down in the future. As far as money laundering or RICO charges, I don't know enough about that to say one way or another. That would just be speculation on my part. Um, I think the bigger concern, I always think about, if I'm involved in the case, and my biggest concern would be, number one, who do we need to worry about flipping against us? Number one, who do we need to worry about who may be testifying against you? Number two, what else have you done that they don't know about? And number three, have you made any other statements out there that to people, admissions or stuff like that? So the bigger question, I think, right now is who is actually cooperating with the feds, and what additional charges may come down against those people or against Anthony.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned the possibility of additional charges. We saw yesterday. I guess we all missed this last week, but apparently, not only the Justice Department puts out that statement, but the IRS actually put out their own statement on their website, on their social media. I would assume that's a bad sign.
Yeah. So with the IRS, the special agent with the IRS, they're going to be looking at all the financials. They're going to be looking at everything. So it's one thing when you get the FBI involved, but then when you get the IRS special agents involved as well, they're going to be digging into everything. And I have to imagine that the accounting system that they had set up in the first place was not the most sophisticated. So I think it's going to be pretty easy for the IRS, for their forensic accountants, to put together other charges out there if they can.
Yeah, we've got a question here about Anthony's social media presence, and
Mhm.
will that be used against him? Could he just make the defense that, hey, this is just content. That's what I do. I'm a YouTube guy. Some of this stuff isn't true. I mean, you look at the videos. Obviously, it's a very serious tone when he's talking about robbing Peter to pay Paul, and
Yeah.
all this sort of stuff. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem he has is that he has a 15-minute video where he confesses to all of his crimes. He outlines in great detail what he did, and how he kind of got into that hole. So from a criminal defense standpoint, we're always kind of raised to own up to your mistakes and to admit when you're wrong, take responsibility for your actions. Criminal defense world is just completely opposite. It's shut your mouth and keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything. Don't admit to anything, and don't voluntarily give that information. And yeah, that's going to be a huge problem for him because he's admitted to it on video that millions of people have already seen. So they're going to still investigate him. They're going to have the bank statements. They're going to have cell phone records. They're going to have text messages, emails, contracts. But, their main piece of evidence is going to be that video of Anthony admitting, yeah, this is what I did. Taking watches in to fund a lifestyle that I couldn't afford. And, the one thing he never really says is taking in watches to fund a lifestyle that I couldn't afford with the intent of never repaying these people back. That's going to be the hardest thing to prove. That's the hardest thing to prove in these schemes to defraud, is you have to prove at the moment that they made this agreement to send me a watch, I'll sell it and keep 5% commission or whatever it was. What his intent was at that moment. Is his intent at that moment to do just that, or is his intent at that moment to get the watch, sell it for a discount, and just pocket the money? But I think Anthony kind of closed the door on that when he basically outlined what he was doing and how he was doing it.
Does his lack of remorse, I mean, will that come? Is that a factor when it comes down to sentencing or a plea deal? I mean, are they going to? I mean, they have the videos of him basically blaming Bob and Wesley. It's kind of their fault. They could afford to lose the money. Like,
Yeah.
will that be considered?
Well, certainly lack of remorse is something that the judge can take into consideration at sentencing. Sentencing is probably a ways off in this case, but it depends. If he reaches a deal with the prosecution to some type of plea deal, usually the judge will accept that plea deal. If he pleads directly to the court, pleads guilty to the court, and asks the judge to sentence him, then he'll have a chance to make a statement to the court, expressing that remorse, expressing his shame and his all this other stuff. Or the prosecution would have the same opportunity to present these videos of him arguing with the alleged victims and saying, well, this is your fault, you gave it to me, you don't need the money, stuff like that. So the prosecution would have the same chance to introduce that evidence at sentencing if they wanted to.
If you're his attorney, would you have a strategy? Would you just say, hey, let's negotiate something here? Like, you're going to have to go to prison most likely. How would you attack this from Anthony's perspective?
Well, I don't, I know obviously just kind of what's in the news. Just from a basic constitutional principle, anyone that's arrested of a crime is innocent until proven guilty. As he sits right now, he's innocent. The state hasn't proven anything. They've just said that they've arrested him on criminal charges. I always tell my clients, I say, look, I don't care what you did. I don't care if you did it or if you didn't do it. The only thing I care about is what the evidence shows me. If the evidence shows me that, hey, the state can't prove its case against you, maybe you didn't do it, great. We need to talk about that. If the evidence starts to go the other way and says, it's looking, they got some pretty strong evidence against you, and it's looking like they can prove their case against you, then we need to have a different discussion. Just from what's out there and what I've been able to see, just realistically speaking, just the admission alone, you need to walk in, and Anthony needs to walk in with pretty clear eyes and say, I've already admitted to all this stuff. What can I do to kind of make this right? In some of those other videos, I've seen him, arguing like, what are you going to do? Sue me? You can't get money from me because I'm broke. Which is true. You can sue him and get a judgment against him, but how are you going to enforce the judgment? You can't get money from him if he's not working or if he's in jail. So, I'd certainly suspect that jail time would be a significant possibility, but the bigger, more important thing as far as the alleged victims would be concerned would be probation, and restitution being a specific term of that probation, meaning, let's say he does, 24 months in jail followed by 10 years probation to pay back the restitution. Civil judgment doesn't have any teeth because there's really no remedy. You can potentially try to garnish his wages, but that's going to take forever. If he's on probation for 10 years and a condition of that probation is to pay back restitution, he's going to have to make monthly payments, and he's going to have a significant reason to do so, because if he just doesn't make the payments, he's going to go back to jail. He's going to violate his probation, and then he's going to go right back into jail. So obviously restitution is going to be a strong factor in this case, and probation, that being a condition of probation, is going to be an important factor, I think, in any sentence that he does receive.
So we got a lot of questions about Freedom of Information Act request. Obviously, I've been digging up a lot of the old police reports on Anthony, going through the counties and the police departments. Federal's a little bit different. Like, what should we expect moving forward? Are we going to be able to see what was in that storage unit? Are we going to be able to see a mugshot? What do you have anything to look forward to over on Reddit, I guess?
So I did see in the complaint that they asked for it to be sealed, which I guess the judge didn't seal it. So, the FBI knows it's a high profile case, or a lot of people are interested in it. So I think moving forward, they're going to try to want to seal um, any of that stuff coming out, just so that they can kind of keep it closer to the vest. But if it's available, if it's up, it's public record that you can certainly view. It's nothing that's hidden unless they do seal it.
And I know you've been you've worked for the public defender's office in your career. Obviously, federal's a little bit different. What are those public defenders known to do a good job? Are they just trying to plea these things out, or is he going to have to? I mean, I assume he can't afford an attorney. That's probably very expensive to defend a case like this, right?
Yeah, I mean, this type of case, he's probably looking at probably 30 grand, in excess of that. If it goes to trial, a lot more. But the federal, public defenders in general, federal public defenders just get a bad rap, unfortunately. The biggest complaint and the most realistic complaint is there's just so many clients that they have to deal with, that they have to kind of triage their cases. What cases can I work out? Which cases are going to need a little bit more work? They're all great attorneys, but they just get a bad rap because a lot of the times their clients are going to be guilty, and a lot of times they're going to need to plead to something as opposed to going to trial and getting a lot more harsher sentence. On the flip side, the federal public defenders are seasoned criminal defense attorneys who have been doing this for decades. They've been in the federal system for years. I personally have handled 35 trials myself. Federal public defenders, I mean, you work at the PD's office and you can try 100 cases, no problem. So they're all excellent attorneys. It's really just going to come down to the facts of the case. And do you want to take a case to trial where you basically admit on video and there's forensic evidence of you stealing money and you buying cars? Or do you want to try to cut your losses, try to get the best deal that you can, and try to avoid 20 years in prison? My advice is let's try to get the best deal we can, because 20 years in prison is a long time.
Just to circle back on the DUI situation, because this has been asked a lot. He got a DUI in February. Obviously, he has several in his past. He got a suspended sentence on that. He's on probation currently. Obviously, this case is way more significant than that. But does this federal case violate his probation on the DUI?
Yeah, so just being arrested on the federal case would violate his probation on the DUI. Again, it's I don't know. You said it's out of Texas.
This one's out of California.
California. I would assume it's a misdemeanor, so he's looking at up to a year. I wouldn't. He'll most likely get credit for that time that he's in now. So, honestly, the DUI violation of probation and DUI kind of a blip on the radar when you're staring down 20 years on a federal case.
A lot of questions about his electronic devices. We've kind of gone over that. So they're going to be all over that laptop he was using in the coffee shop and the cell phone. Are they going to? Obviously, they're going to look at these other dealers. Maybe he's communicating with back and forth. So, do they just download those phones, or how does it work? Do they actually? I mean, if he got out today, does he have a phone still, or?
No, so they keep that. They anything that they take during the search warrant is evidence, and he wouldn't get that back until the case is concluded. So, the phone's going to be important, the laptop's going to be important, any paper documents are going to be important, but he's not going to get that back. Even if he bonds out today, he's not getting that property back, because that's going to be in evidence and it's going to stay there until the case is concluded.
I mean, it doesn't even seem like they've talked to Anthony yet? Like, do they even, attempt to have an interview with him, or are they just going off of, the victims, this employee that's cooperated, and they just don't even need any statements from him?
I would assume that they've tried to speak to him since being arrested. Um, it's a tricky, it's a slippery slope when you have the evidence to arrest someone. The police don't want to do something to compromise their investigation by arresting somebody, not reading a Miranda, having them make statements that they can't use at a later date. So, I would suspect, once he's arrested, they may try to interview him at the jail. But, it sounds to me like, and typically, with an FBI investigation, with really any criminal investigation, police don't want that individual to know that they're investigating them for a crime. So, when they're investigating in the background and they have enough evidence, they're not going to walk up to the guy and say, "Hey, we got X, Y, and Z. What do you have to say about that?" Just give him a chance to get a head start on him. They want to get him in custody, get him in jail, so that make sure that he's not going anywhere, not to tip him off or give him any reason to think that he might be in trouble.
I mentioned offline with you the situation going on with Trevor, who is Anthony's kind of right-hand man at TPG. Obviously, he's been dealing with a drug trafficking case out of Pinellas County, and the timing was interesting because this has been going on for years. He just recently pled guilty. Anthony then gets arrested. Now we have the sentencing. Is there any way that he could have cooperated with the FBI in exchange for a lighter state sentence? Or are those two totally different things?
He could have. So, interestingly, I started at the public defender's office in Pinellas County. So I'm familiar with a lot of the judges down there and the prosecutors. But I pulled up his case in Pinellas County, and I pulled up the plea agreement. So he pled out to like 15 charges or something. And if you pull up the plea, he pled what we call straight up. He pled to the judge, meaning the judge would sentence him, and there's no agreed upon sentence. It's just whatever the judge would want to give him. And here in Florida, we have what are called sentencing guidelines. So for each criminal charge you're charged with, carries with it a certain number of points. If you score above a certain threshold, then you have to be sentenced to a mandatory prison sentence. And in looking at his plea agreement, his guidelines, meaning the lowest that he can be sentenced to, was like 175 months or something like that, up to probably life, if I had to guess. I don't know too much about that case, but 30 years or life. So the minimum that he's looking at is 175 months. Is there a chance that he could be cooperating in a federal case? Yeah, it could be. I think the bigger question is his sentencing is set for end of November, and typically a good tell if someone is cooperating in a case is they plead guilty in their case that they have proceeding. They plead guilty to the court, so there's no agreed upon sentence. And then that sentencing date keeps getting kind of pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. So if he's actually sentenced on the 29th, that's a pretty clear indication that he wasn't cooperating. But if that date comes and goes and it gets past another month, another two, that may be a sign that he actually is cooperating with the feds to see what information he may be able to provide to get a lighter sentence if possible.
I think we've pretty much covered everything. One last thing, I know you're a criminal defense attorney, but people have asked for advice for the victims if you have any. It sounds like there's not a lot of hope there. There's a lot of lawsuits that have already been filed.
Yeah.
What do you tell those people that are out money? Is it just lesson learned, or is there something else they can do here?
I mean, I think the saying in the watch game is you don't buy the watch, you buy the dealer. Um, you know, unfortunately, Anthony kind of had a reputation beforehand of this flashy lifestyle, and that everyone was kind of suspicious about. Um, but as far as restitution and getting their money back, I think that's going to be a little ways down the line. Certainly if you had a watch that you gave to him that he sold and you never got anything, contact the FBI for sure, 100%. Give him your information and let him know that you think this guy stole your watch or stole your money, because that's going to make their case stronger, and it's going to really give him an incentive to try to resolve this case sooner rather than later, so that he can hopefully try to make that restitution payment, which is going to be a big part of any sentence.
Gotcha. Well, hey, I really appreciate you coming on. We'd love to talk to you again as this thing goes forward. And do you want to shout out your YouTube or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to talk in the future. It's like I said, it's something that interests me in the just kind of the whole thing. You can follow me on TikTok at Make It Ranka, Rainka. My YouTube, Ranka Law. And if you have any questions, you can go to my website, Make It Ranka, MAKEIT Ranka, RAINKA.com. Happy to answer any questions you may have, or talk to you guys if you have any questions or concerns about kind of moving forward. So I want to be, a source for people, if they don't have any guidance or don't know where to turn. I'm always happy to help and give some information and give information as best I can.
Awesome. Thanks so much, man. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. I appreciate it. Have a good one.